So let's turn the page and take a look at some other college football matchups. Coach, a few big games this week. In our first matchup, we have Georgia taking on Tennessee. Georgia absolutely obliterated Ole Miss this past week. They take on Tennessee, who, again, has really seemed like they've lost their way after taking a big loss against Missouri. How do you see this game shaking out? Is Georgia going to maybe come in after their highest high, maybe hitting a low, and will Tennessee bounce back, or do we expect to see more of the same that we saw last week?
Well, I think it depends how many times you hear Rocky Top. If you hear it a lot, that means that Tennessee's doing well. They've fallen to 21, and I think their quarterback, Joe Milton, is really a good quarterback. They could give Georgia trouble. Georgia's always had problems starting, except last week. I mean, they were just phenomenal last week, and they didn't miss a beat. And it looks like their offense can run, they can throw, and they have a prototype quarterback. They've had the same type of quarterback for the last few years that runs their offense extremely well. Most people are getting by with quarterbacks that can really run. And but Georgia seems to go to the pocket quarterbacks. The guys are very smart to get them the right plays, make the checks at the line of scrimmage. They're very, very talented on defense, but I don't know if Tennessee have enough firepower. And as you just said, who's going to come out of the locker room? If Tennessee comes out like they did last week, Georgia would annihilate them. But they're playing at home, so who knows what's going to happen on that river where people, they go by boat in their stadium. So that could be an instant matchup. And I think the only thing that can salvage their season for Tennessee is maybe a win over Georgia. So that who knows that Georgia better be an upset watch right here.
And taking a look at another matchup, we have UNC taking on Clemson. We know Clemson has not had the ideal season that they hoped for. And to be fair, Coach Dabo Swinney has had to undergo some massive turnover in coaching staff over the past 2 years. Both of his coaches on staff that he had for a long time that he held together with duct tape and paper clips and glue, they went off for greener pastures, both getting head coaching jobs. So what do you see happening in this game with UNC and Clemson taking each other on?
I think it was a huge win last week for them, and I think they surprised themselves in how well they played. But they're playing against North Carolina, Mac Brown's team. They have a guy that early in the year was mentioned for the Heisman also by the name of May. He's a guy that was in the Manning camp also. So I look for this. They're number 22. Clemson is not ranked. Clemson, I can see this game really being a close game and maybe even a North Carolina win, because I think Clemson is not as talented as they were in past years.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do think I think Clemson might have put a lot into that game against Notre Dame earlier in the season too, and I do like UNC in that matchup. But moving on to our next one, we have Washington taking on Oregon State. Is this the week that Washington gets clipped? We keep seeing them grind out these tight wins, which hats off to them. Again, they continue to win in the face of adversity, but some of these teams that they played aren't phenomenal ball clubs. So do we continue to see them win and trudge along, or do we see this being a game where they could possibly lose their footing and drop a loss?
This is an interesting game. I think the most interesting matchup of anybody this week, number 15 against number 10. I'm sorry, number 5 against number 10. Penix has got to try to keep his Heisman hopes alive by having a good game. Oregon State's got a guy by the name of Ukulele or whatever his name is. He came from Clemson, if you recall. He's having a great year. Oregon State could put up points. They're playing at home. Could be a real good. This could be a big upset right here, or it'll be a real close game. And the reason I say that, Washington's defense has really been shown a lot of, I think, what do you call it, simplicity lately. They have not really blitzed an awful lot, and they've given up a lot of points, a lot of yardage. So gets a great quarterback. So look out right here for this one. Now, if Washington gets by this one, remember, and wins out, and Oregon's got to win out, that's going to be an instant matchup again for that conference title.
Coach, in our last game that we're going to discuss, we have Kansas taking on Kansas State, two really solid head football coaches, Coach Leopold and Coach Klein. How do you see this game shaking out? A good old rivalry, maybe the only one that'll be alive once the new Big 12 is laid out in the season. What do you expect to happen in this matchup?
Well, Kansas State being number 23, and I know Coach Snyder, I'm sure, is still remnants of his staff are still there, and the way he built that program going against Kansas. But all bets are off when you play a rival like this. And I think that Kansas has to salvage this ball game themselves to salvage this season. They'll be bowl eligible anyway, and so will Kansas State. But, you always like to beat your arch rival, especially when it comes down to recruiting, because you can sit in that living room and say, hey, we beat Kansas State. They're after you, so they control the recruiting in Kansas. So rivalry is always big. It's big for the fans, but more importantly for the recruiting process.
And, Coach, that's all for the previews, but I got to ask while we're here and we're having a college football conversation, what are your thoughts on paying $76 million for a coach to walk away and to not coach your program anymore?
Well, it's just, can you imagine that? You can buy a third world country with that kind of money. He's going to make $19 million, and then he's going to make, for the next 8 years, he's going to make another $7 million. I know Coach Fisher personally, and I really feel badly for him. I hate to see any coach lose their job, and because it's so difficult, because everybody's working hard, and they spend a lot of hours, 15, 18 hours a day in that office, and do a lot of miss their families, traveling, things of that nature. And they say, well, look at the money you're making, but yet the pressure is just unbelievable. And even if you win, they want to know, well, why didn't you beat the spread? Stuff like that. So, and they, Texas A&M is a program with a lot of endowments, and deep pockets, people over there. And they thought that he was going to be the Messiah to resurrect that program. I think that because since R.C. Slocum left, but I really feel bad for Coach Fisher because he had a skin on the wall. When he left Florida State, they won it there. And, they gave him a replica of the national championship trophy when he signed over there. But that's a stretch nowadays because there's so many good football teams out there, especially with the portal. Because the portal, they can really resurrect a team if you make the right decision. Sometimes you can pick the wrong guys in the portal, but you can rebuild your team quicker. And like what Deion Sanders has done at Colorado, even with 70 guys, even though he didn't have a winning record yet, but he's certainly a competitive football team.